lakehouse can be considered as the data lake equivalent in the Microsoft Fabric ecosystem. So now on that aspect, we saw that whenever we create a lakehouse, a front-end view or a lakehouse view gets created. Along with that, two additional component gets created. That is the semantic model and the SQL analytics endpoint. Now, the semantic model is basically it's a read-only version of the data system, and that's usable for the analytical folks who are familiar with DAX queries. So they can build reports on top of that or do analysis via Excel or analytical expressions. Whereas SQL analytics endpoint is a feature that Microsoft has provided for the analytical folks and the data engineers to analyze the data in the form of SQL queries. So let me go into the lakehouse view. Now one can switch across the lakehouse view to the SQL analytics endpoint view from this option or from the workspace itself and directly click on the SQL analytics endpoint that we had seen. Now there are two sections within the lakehouse. One is the tables, another is the files. Now remember what is data lake? Data lake is basically a system that can have structured, semi-structured, and unstructured data. So it's in the file section that one can upload any type of file, be it structured, unstructured, or semi-structured. Correct? Now, there's a table section. Now in table section, a table gets created. That table is called delta table, and it is based on the symbol that we all can see that it has a delta symbol here. But at the underlying, we identified that the underlying table is a part of, is present in the form of delta parquet itself, because in Microsoft Fabric, the two storage systems, that is the Fabric warehouse and the Fabric lakehouse, store the underlying data in the form of delta parquet itself. And we had identified how the log files reference the latest file, have the metadata, and then make sure that other files are marked as removed as long as they are not needed. Then we had also seen that one can load the data from the files into the table section by simple click on that. That is, if I click on the ellipses for the three files, I do get the option of load to tables, and I can load it into existing table or a new table. Now, in case of existing table, I do get an option to select the table, and I do get an option to either append or overwrite. Now, one of the case study was there are multiple types of structured files, correct? Like text, CSV file, Excel file, Parquet files. These are all structured files wherein the data is in the form of rows and columns, correct? So I told you to upload different types of structured files and identify whether for those all the structured, semi-structured, and unstructured files are you able to load the data via this option. So we saw that for CSV file, it is possible, correct? But for Excel file, let's check, it is not there. Now, I also have a text file. For text file also, it's not there. So basically, Microsoft Fabric supports the load to table options for only two types of structured files. One is the CSV files, or to be more specific, delimited text file. It need not be just comma separated. It can be any delimited file. We also are correct that I had a file with pipe cap delimited or a cap pipe delimited, but still I was able to load the data from the files into the table section. So it's not CSV file per se, but it is any delimited text file, but in the form of extension of .csv, tsv, SV, separated value. Then comes Parquet file. Parquet files are the second file and the only second file. Include CSV and Parquet are the only two files that support the load to table functionality. So now in case if you see I have a Titanic Parquet file, if I click on load to tables and new table, it would go and load it as a new table itself. So remember that only Parquet file and CSV files or delimited files can be loaded as a table from the files into the table aspect. Any queries by the time this is getting loaded? Now, we had also seen that even though the table gets created or the data gets refreshed in the lakehouse view, it does take some time for that to get refreshed into the lakehouse, into the SQL Analytics endpoint view. So the sync of the data or the state of the data from the front end lakehouse view to the SQL Analytics endpoint view does take some time. And as of now, even Microsoft has acknowledged that that's an issue which they are trying to work out on. Correct. For that, I told you all to identify, because imagine that I loaded the data into the lakehouse. Then I want the user to leverage the SQL Analytics endpoint for analysis. He received a mail that the job got executed, meaning I loaded the data into the lakehouse. But in that case, the SQL Analytics endpoint may or may not be synchronized, though he received the mail. Correct. So how can we ensure that the whenever anyone receives a notification that the job has been completed, it includes that the SQL Analytics endpoint has been refreshed? So I won't explain it today. I won't ask anything today. In next couple of sessions, by this week end on Saturday, let's identify and let's discuss on those pointers. I'd like you all to think across in next 2 days on how to overcome that issue. So these were the aspects that we covered in the last call. So now let's focus on some of the concepts of the SQL Analytics endpoint and tables. Now, before we move to the SQL Analytics endpoint in detail, let's focus on the Lakehouse table section itself. Now, in the Lakehouse table section, we identified that one way for me to load the data from the files is via into the table, or to load anything into the table is to upload a file into the file section and then use the load to tables aspect. Correct. Now I have an iris parquet file. Correct. Now in case if I try to load this, it would fail, because in this aspect there are certain limitations that you cannot have some special characters in the column names. Now the column name in this file is simple.length. So since it is dot aspect, it is not supported, and there's some limitations while loading from in this format into the tables. What I mean by that is if I open this parquet file, I'll see that this is the column name, thereby creating that issue. So in this case, I cannot load it from this option. Though I have that option, it would fail.
And then spaces are also not allowed, I think.
Correct. There's
Right? Yeah, yeah,
limitations on that aspect. Correct.
yeah,
So now let me go to the SQL Analytics endpoint. So we identified one way of loading into the table section. Correct. But if you see here, I don't have any option to create a table. Correct. If I click on these three ellipses, there is no option to create any table. Also, let's take the reverse way as well. Correct. I am able to upload files or upload a folder, but Microsoft Fabric does not give an option to download the files from the portal. Not sure why. That's a feedback that most of us have provided. But as of today, one can upload files into the file section, but cannot download files from there. Unlike Azure Blob Storage, wherein we could upload and download, Microsoft Fabric Lakehouse file system does not provide an option to download the files. You can only upload the files. So then one way we identified to have tables is from files to tables. But then are there any other ways how I can create tables or load data into the tables? So yes. Now let's take a look with respect to the SQL analytics endpoint. Now, if you all see, by default, everything gets created under the DBO schema, because when I had created the lakehouse, I had disabled the property and I had not selected the property of new schema because it was still in preview mode. Correct. So now within the tables, you all can see I have 3 tables, which is equivalent to this aspect. But am I able to see the other files that are present here in the SQL Analytics endpoint? No. So the SQL Analytics endpoint only references the data that is present in the tables section, not in the files section. So that's one aspect. Now, let me query the data. Select all from dbo.titanic. Now, let me execute it. I'm able to see the data. Correct. Meaning, I'm able to query the data that is present in the tables section within the Lakehouse view. Now, let me try and create a table. One way we saw to create a table is from the file to load as table, and in that only some specific set of files that are supported, like load to delimited as well as Sparky. So now let me go ahead and create a table. Create table dbo.test. C1 column integer, C2 column integer. Correct. Now let me execute this query. This shows that, let's read the error message. The external policy action create was denied on the requested resource. Meaning, in SQL Analytics endpoint, I cannot create a table. It is just a read-only interface, and you cannot do any create aspect with respect to tables. Now, I'm not able to create a table. We all saw this, correct? That I'm unable to create a table. But can I update the data in one of the existing table itself? Or insert or delete data? Meaning, can I execute data manipulation queries within via the SQL Analytics endpoint? Let's check that. So this is my table, correct? So now let me insert into dbo.structured1 value select 1, 1, 1. Now you all can see, correct? Data manipulation language statements are not supported for this table type in this version of SQL Server. Meaning, any operations pertaining to tables cannot be created from the SQL Analytics endpoint. Meaning, you all cannot create a table. You all cannot. Let's try to drop the table. You cannot drop the table, or you cannot execute any DML statement, meaning no actions cannot be taken on the table section except for read only, that is select query. So the SQL Analytics endpoint only supports read only aspect on the tables. Any queries up till now? Yes or no?
So it means that only one way to create tables is through the files.
No, that's the one way up till now in which we
Okay.
have. Eventually, we'll discuss upon some other aspects as well. It's up till now that you all have seen only one way. So no actions can be done via create on the tables directly. But then in the left corner, I'm seeing that there are some views, functions, and stored procedures. Correct. So can I create views? Create view dbo.view1 as select star from dbo.structured1. You all are able to create views. Correct. Why do we create views, functions, and stored procedures in SQL? It's majorly to do analysis. Correct. Imagine that in case if I have multiple tables and I have to do analysis across multiple tables, one way is to create a stored procedure functions or to create views. Correct. So that I do data, I join across multiple aspects and I identify that. So whenever you create any view or stored procedure functions, are you actually impacting the table by any way? No, correct. Because you're just referencing the table as select star from that table. And SQL Analytics endpoint does support reading the data from the tables. Correct. Hence, one can create views, functions, and stored procedures with just querying the tables. No way can you manipulate anything into the tables via stored procedure. It is just to reference the data as read-only mode. So now I created the view. Now I can even query the view. So the SQL Analytics endpoint does not support any option other than read on the tables, but one can create views, functions, and stored procedure for analytical purposes by querying across multiple tables. So any queries up till now on
Yeah,
this?
Nandan. Can we perform join, union, some other SQL function?
Yes, because whenever you perform joins or unions, are you actually physically updating the data in the table? No, correct? You're just querying the data. So anything that is pertaining to querying the data is possible. So I have structured one table, correct? I also have select all from dbo dot structured duplicate. That also, I guess, contains a similar data, correct? Let me query it. Okay, so I have three columns, correct? Let me do a join.
What if in the stored procedure you are writing those DML statements?
It
Will
would
it
fail.
not occur?
As I stated that in stored procedure, you can only use stored procedure for analytical aspects and you cannot have any create or DML aspects as long as the table is being used in a read-only mode across stored procedure, it can be leveraged, else the stored procedure would fail. So now, if I execute this join query, I'll be able to say that I'm able to join the data since it's a read-only format. So any queries on the SQL Analytics endpoint as of now? Now, the SQL Analytics endpoint can even be connected from external systems. Now, those who are familiar with working with Azure databases or any databases, There are multiple ways how you all can access a database. For that, you need the server name and the database name. Correct. And one of the common tool that we all use to access the databases is what we call as a SQL server. Correct. Microsoft SQL Server SSMS, that is SQL Server Management Studio. SSMS, SQL Server Management Studio. Now, how can I access a SQL Analytics endpoint from the SQL Server? From the SSMS, my fault. Now, before we move to the SSMS, I created a view, correct? Now under views, I can see view 1. Now, would the view 1 be reflected in the table sections within Microsoft Fabric, within the Lakehouse? Yes or no?
Yes, mostly.
Okay. The answer to that is no. As I stated, that the SQL Analytics endpoint only references the table section. And in table section, the underlying data is in the form of delta per k. Delta per k is with respect to physical table existence. Correct. Whereas in SQL Analytics endpoints, you are creating read-only references like views, etc. Views do not physically store any data. Agree? Hence, only in the SQL Analytics endpoint would you all be able to see the views, functions, and stored procedures, and nowhere else in the Lakehouse view. Clear? Any queries up till now? The multiple other aspects pertaining to the SQL Analytics endpoint and the Lakehouse view itself. So any queries
Only,
before?
yeah, Nandan, so only table will be stored, right? Not files and all that. Like in Lakehouse view, we can see the file section, right?
That is not visible in the SQL Analytics endpoint because SQL Analytics
Yeah.
endpoint, SQL stands for structured query language, correct? In the files, you can also have semi-structured and unstructured data, correct? So it's only in the from the table section that contains the structured data that would be visible across the SQL Analytics endpoint. Clear?
Okay. Yeah. So it is stored all the like in one like logical layer, right?
Everything hosts on this concept of, remember, one lake is your logical lake house that is present in the form of Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2. All the workspaces are part of tenant. All the workspaces host the lake house. So indirectly, all the workspaces data gets unioned across the one lake.
So
Clear?
files will be also there in the one like, right?
Correct. Tell me, when I said storage, isn't file a type of data?
Yes, yes.
So it does not mean that it has to be a table. File is also a data. That's what I had explained in the beginning. That
Yes.
data can be of multiple types: structured, semi-structured, and unstructured. These all combine the data itself. Correct. And also, whenever you create certain reports, etc., they do hold some metadata or data. So whenever any component is created in Fabric Workspace, it does hold some amount of data storage. Union of the data across the entire tenant is present in something called as one lake. Clear? So now imagine that rather than using it from the SQL Analytics endpoint portal view, I want to analyze that data from SSMS or some other components that you would eventually take across, see across, like pipelines, data flow gen 2, Power BI, etc. So in that case, what you can do is click on the SQL Analytics endpoint. Here, you automatically get an option to open in Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio Code is basically an IDE platform for developers for developmental aspects. Correct? But there are multiple options here. But for now, let's focus on the connecting it via the SSMS. So for that, there is an option to get, I need to get the server on which the database is hosted. Correct? So for that, click on copy SQL connection string. It would provide you with a server name. So I copied it. Now let me go to the SSMS. In that, click on connect. And since it's a database engine that I'm trying to connect to, correct? So I'll click on database engine. Now in the database engine, provide the server name that I had copied, that you all had copied. And then in the authentication section, the SQL Analytics endpoint supports only two forms of authentication. One is Microsoft Entra ID authentication. Let's go across the authentications one by one. Windows authentication. Windows authentication is basically applicable for databases that are hosted on premises or in infrastructure as a service, not for any cloud databases. It's like you're authenticating from the system which you're logged into. And since cloud and SaaS, PaaS and SaaS itself are on cloud aspect, you cannot leverage Windows authentication. SQL Server authentication is basically wherein you create a username and a database with, a username and a password within the database itself. It's not linked to the Active Directory. It's SQL Server, meaning it is that specific server's username and password authentication that we all are trying to use. So for that option is not supported in Microsoft Fabric. Microsoft Entra MFA, Microsoft Entra password are the authentication wherein I'll use the username and password of a service account or my personal account via which that has access to the workspace. Then you have service principal authentication. Imagine that in case if I give my service principal some access at the workspace level, then via providing the service principal the client ID and the client secret, I can connect to the SQL Analytics endpoint. So that would be your case study for today, wherein as the part of previous case study wherein you all had created a service principal, correct? The client ID and the client secret, the secret of which you had kept in the Azure Key Vault, correct? And in the previous case study, you all had created a lakehouse, correct? So in that, from that lakehouse, try to connect that lakehouse via SQL Analytics endpoint of that lakehouse via SSMS, leveraging service principal authentication. Now for that, in order for you all to do that, you all have to provide that service principal access within the workspace and provide it as a contributor access and identify whether you all are able to access the data or not. So for our use case, I'll proceed with Microsoft Entra MFA authentication. And I'll provide my, let me cancel this. I'll provide my username. Now, when I click on connect, it would provide me a pop-up. And the pop-up is in my another window, hence you all are not able to see it. So let me authenticate it. Since my account has MFA enabled, I'll have to enable my or provide my MFA authentication, post which I'll be able to log in. So my authentication is complete. Now it's trying to log in into the database. Now under server, if I expand, ignore this destination, this as of now. Let's focus on LK1. LK1 is the lakehouse, correct? So now here, if I execute a new query, I'll be able to execute everything like the view that I had created. But imagine that if I do not know which all tables or views are present, correct? So you can use the system inbuilt tables, like select all from information underscore schema dot tables. So every database, not specific to Microsoft, but even external storage, external databases like Snowflake, etc., have some inbuilt metadata tables or system tables. Those are not the tables that we all have created. Those are inbuilt within the system that contains the metadata of the system. So in Microsoft, select all or star from information underscore schema contains metadata with respect to multiple aspects like tables, views, etc. So for now, I'll query on the tables. This states that there are these many system tables, these many query inside tables. Query inside table meaning that are specific to performance related aspects. If you see, these are table of type view, meaning these are views within the corresponding Lakehouse 1 SQL Analytics endpoint. When the table type is base table, it means these are physical tables that are present in the SQL Analytics endpoint. And this was the view that I had created, dbo.view1. So now let me execute select all from dbo.view1. Now, in case if I execute this, I'll be able to see that data. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 13, 1, 2, 3. So one can access the SQL Analytics endpoint as long as the user has the SQL connection string of that SQL Analytics endpoint. I can access it from any system that supports connecting to the database. It can be SSMS, it can be some other tools like Power BI, etc. Now, let's look at the server name. The server name is some random GUID .datawarehouse.fabric.microsoft.com. Now this random GUID is, as I stated, it's random. We do not have the control to provide the specific server name. It gets randomly allocated from workspace to workspace. So one can state that the server that gets created within the Microsoft Fabric is unique at the workspace level. When I say workspace level, imagine that if I create a lakehouse in another workspace, it would have a different server name. But let me go ahead and create a lakehouse, another lakehouse within the same workspace. So now let me create lakehouse 2. So when I create another lakehouse within the same workspace, the SQL Analytics endpoint would be visible under the same server because the server is present at the workspace level and it's unique at the server level, workspace level itself. So now if you all see, I have a SQL Analytics endpoint. Let me disconnect it and try to connect it again. Now you all can see that Lakehouse 2 got created under the same server. So any lakehouses that you create within the same workspace would be part of the same server. But in case if you create lakehouses across different workspaces, they would be hosted on different servers because servers are uniquely created at a workspace level with a unique GUID ID associated with that workspace. We do not have the control to provide a specific server name. Any queries up till now? Okay.
Nandan, do we need to install SSMS externally or it's inbuilt?
In the latest versions of Windows, it gets installed by default, but in lower versions of Windows, you have to install it explicitly. And so
Okay.
in most cases, yes, the answer is yes. And it's a free open source, it's a free software, free downloadable software, correct? If you Google SSMS download on Microsoft, you get redirected to Microsoft site, and from there you can download it.
Okay.
Clear?
And to perform all these activities, right, we need to resume the fabric capacity, right?
Correct. Without, for you all, it is fabric capacity.
Uh,
For me, since mine is under trial version, correct, you all can see that I have a trial version, correct? I'm using fabric trial capacity, hence no need for me to resume any fabric capacity. I'm using the trial capacity itself. But for you all, until 90 days, you will have to resume the fabric capacity that you all have created.
okay.
Clear?
Got it. Yeah.
Now, let me query select all from dbo.view1. Correct. Now, in case if I execute this, it states that invalid object name dbo.view1. But I do have view1, correct? I had created the view. What is the difference between this statement and this statement here? Both are the same statement, correct? Select all from dbo.view1, select all from dbo.view1. What is the difference between these two?
The naming convention.
Case sensitive.
Sorry?
In V1, the
Case
echo one,
sensitive.
I think it is a case sensitive.
So if you all see here, the V here is small, whereas V here is large. And the object that when I had created the object, it was created with respect to small v itself. So someone stated a terminology called case sensitive. Correct? Case sensitive is basically a part of something called as larger terminology in the data world called collation. In data base world, there is a concept called collation. And collation in SQL basically provides us with sorting rules. So for sorting rules, case and accent sensitivity to the sensitivity properties to the data. So a collation defines bit patterns that represent each character in the metadata of the database. What do I mean by that? Any string character, basically we have to sort string characters by ascending or descending. There is some accent involved, correct? Meaning, for folks, you might have seen certain characters dot on some of the alphabet names in certain locations like Poland or etc. Correct? So in such scenarios, there is some accent that is involved. There are some sorting rules that would be involved. Those can be managed by something called as collations. So collation is basically a configuration that determines how the character data sorting and comparison is done. So it basically defines rules for character set encoding, case sensitivity, accent sensitivity, and sorting. Now, the multiple types of collisions that are present across databases. Now, the generic format of the collation is the initial part is the collation name. Then it contains something called as case sensitivity. And we'll discuss on what this sensitivity is defined. Then there is something called as accent sensitivity, CANA sensitivity, width sensitivity, and supplementary characters. So let's take a look with respect to this format here. So Latin 1 is basically the language and the local name, what we call as the collision name. Then CI stands for case insensitive. So case sensitivity can be, this option can either be case sensitive or case insensitive. So CI stands for case insensitive, CS stands for case sensitive. Now what do we mean by case sensitive? In case if your upper characters and lower characters are considered to be same, then we call it as case insensitive. If small a is not equal to capital A, then it is case sensitive. That is the scenario that we saw in the SQL Analytics endpoint view, correct? Wherein in case of SQL Analytics endpoint view, I had view 1 with V capital and view 1 with V small. It's only in case of small v that it got executed, meaning it is considered capital V, uppercase V, and lowercase v as two different aspects, meaning the database or the SQL Analytics endpoint is case sensitive. Then comes accent sensitivity. In case if E and E with a tilde at the top, meaning these are accent depending. In case if I assume that these are same characters and I do not consider the accent into the place, then it's accent insensitive. But in case if they are not equal, then it is accent sensitive. Now, CANA sensitivity and width sensitivity. These two sensitivities are majorly applicable for Southeast Asian languages like Japanese, Chinese, etc., wherein you have characters, correct? I mean, if you see full width and half width, meaning if this width of the character visual representation is the same, but the width is different based on some big letter or small letter, it's width sensitivity. And CANA sensitivity is somewhat on the similar aspect, but these two are majorly for Southeast Asian languages. And then there is encoding format involved, that is UTF-8. Now, collation can be defined at 4 levels: server level, database level, column level, and expression level. Since this call is only specific with Fabric and not collation, I won't cover everything in detail. I'll cover only server level collation and database level collation. And that's what we saw, correct? In the SQL Analytics endpoint, we had a server that got created initially, and we had the SQL Analytics endpoint database. So we'll take a look with respect to those two aspects. Now, if you see width, it's the same character, but with a different width aspect. That is what we call as width sensitivity. And in case of the supplementary character, there is selector sensitivity as well. It is the same character, but with a color, a Unicode character aspect, correct? So in case if the visual representation needs to be the same without considering the extra color aspect, it's some selector sensitivity. So there are multiple inbuilt type of supplementary character sensitivities that we won't cover across, but just an FYI for you. So now, with this aspect, I can consider that, or I can state that the database provided by the SQL Analytics endpoint is case sensitive. Now, how do I identify what is the collation of the corresponding database? So for that, there is a property called select database property db underscore name collation. So if I execute this system aspect, I'll get the corresponding collation that is associated with the corresponding database. So it states that it is Latin 1 underscore general, which is the collation name underscore 100. Then bin2 underscore UTF-8. Now UTF-8 is the encryption, encoding to be more specific, not the encryption. But I had stated that it contains case sensitivity, accent sensitivity, but I'm saying bin2. bin2 stands for binary. Now, in case if a binary or binary code point is selected, the case sensitivity, the accent sensitivity, and the width sensitivity options are not present. Why it is not present? Because binary sort order is by default case sensitive and accent sensitive. So in case if the collation contains binary, it means it is by default case sensitive and accent sensitive. Now, I stated that collation hierarchy, correct? The collation is present at the server level, at the database level, then at the column level, and then at the expression level, correct? For now, we saw the collation at the database level. Now let's check the collation at the server level. At the server level, the collation is case insensitive and accent sensitive. So server property, this states that provide me the collation for the server, provide me the collation for the database. So from this, we concluded that the SQL Analytics endpoint database contains case sensitive and accent sensitive collation. Now, the question is, you all might be having the question as to, can I update the collation of my SQL Analytics endpoint? Now, before that, I had stated, correct, that there are multiple types of collations that are supported by the databases across different systems. Now, to identify which all collations are supported by the corresponding database in Microsoft ecosystem, or there is a function, these are system. Anything with sys dot, information schema, or keywords are inbuilt functions or keywords. So I can execute this aspect called health collation. This states that the SQL Analytics endpoint database only supports two different collations. One is the default collation via which it was created, and this is another collation that it supports. So, considering that it can support only two collations, can anyone state that is it possible for me to update the collation of the database or the SQL Analytics endpoint database? Yes or no?
No.
SQL endpoint, I'm not sure, but database level, I think it's
As of now, the discussion, Ramesh, here is with respect to SQL Analytics endpoint database, not other databases within Microsoft ecosystem. Correct? So do you think it can be updated or not?
I think no.
Unfortunately, as of today, updating the collation of the SQL Analytics endpoint of the Lakehouse is not supported. Then, if that is not supported, why the hell do I have the second collation option here? It is because, as I stated, that collation can even be defined at the expression level. Correct? Since collation can even be defined at an expression level, only these two collations are supported. One is the default one, and this is the another one for making some expression level collations. And we'll take a look into this expression level collation in next week when we actually work with Fabric Warehouse and other aspects. So for now, let's keep it on hold. But just remember that Lakehouse SQL and X endpoint database supports only two collations. And by default, the database gets created in this collation itself, which is case sensitive. And there is no way for us to update it or even define it while creating of the SQL endpoint as of today. Then what is the use of this second aspect? It is to define expression level collations that we would cover in the subsequent sessions. Now, everything up till now we were querying in the Lakehouse 1 itself. You all can see, correct? It is in the Lakehouse 1 that I was executing the query. Now imagine that I want to execute in the Lakehouse 2. Let me click on that database and click on new query. So now I'm currently in the Lakehouse 2 session. Now, can I cross query the data from Lakehouse 1 into the Lakehouse 2? So let me try that out. Select all from Lakehouse 1 dot dbo dot view1. So I am able to cross query the data from Lakehouse 1 in Lakehouse 2. Is this shortcut? Whatever I did, can I consider this as the shortcut or no?
Yes.
Okay, I heard yes from someone. What about others?
Yes, Nandan.
Okay. Unfortunately, that's not the case. This is not shortcut. We'll take a look at shortcut in the subsequent sessions. Shortcut is different than this. Now, what is the difference between a shortcut and what we did? This is what we call as cross-querying between the databases. Since these databases are present in the same server, correct? I can virtually reference across those two data. So one can consider it as a shortcut, but that is not a shortcut because this concept of cross-referencing the data has been in the system since multiple ages ago because these databases are present in the same server. It's like, consider that within the same home, there are two rooms. I am sitting in one room, my wife is sitting in another room. We all can call each other directly, correct? By calling our names from one room to another. So it's cross querying from one room to another room. Whereas, imagine that I am present in ground floor room, a ground floor home, and my wife is present in second floor home. At that time, even if I shout, I cannot cross call, correct? That voice won't be heard. I can call from my mobile and call her back. So that mobile aspect is a shortcut that, or what I can do is I can create a landline, correct? Connecting between my room to her room in second floor. That is the shortcut that I am creating. Whereas this is within the same aspect, it's a cross query within the same workspace. Both are two different aspects. Shortcut will take a look when we actually deep dive in subsequent sessions. So just remember that cross querying between the databases that are present in the same server is not what we call a shortcut. It's cross querying between the databases. Am I clear? Okay. So up till now, in the SQL Analytics endpoint, we covered multiple aspects. We covered something called as collation. We covered that SQL Analytics endpoint is a read-only endpoint for tables. You cannot create or do any DML at the table level. But you can create view, stored procedure functions as long as you are referencing that table in a read-only manner. We saw the collations. We saw that all the databases that get created, the SQL and text endpoint databases that get created within the workspace are hosted on the same server. And that server name is a GUID name that gets automatically created, that is not under our control, but it is unique from workspace to workspace. And then all the databases, the SQL Analytics endpoints within the same server can be cross-queried. So any queries up till now? If no, then I'll move to the next aspect. That is, now in SQL query, I can see that there is something called as the SQL Analytics endpoint under the settings. From here also, I can get the corresponding SQL connection string. Now, if I click on Copilot, as of now, Copilot here seems to be disabled because Copilot is not available for Fabric trial capacities. It is only available for Fabric capacities and any capacity. Now, a default semantic model, Power BI semantic model gets created. In case if I turn this on, what I mean by that, if you all saw here, by default, a semantic model has been created here, correct? Whenever a lakehouse got created. Now, what does this option here mean? What is it? Can someone state me? Okay, let me go ahead and turn this on for now. So when I turn that feature or functionality, does it mean I created a new semantic model? In Lakehouse 1, there was already a semantic model, correct? So now when I enabled this property, does it mean I'm creating a new semantic model? Yes or no?
No, it doesn't look like. Yeah.
Then what does this here signify? What is this benefit here of enabling this property? Remember what the answer is in front of in this page itself that we had discussed. Scan across this page and you all would be able to understand.
And then whatever views we are creating at the SQL and analytics endpoint, right? We can add these views in the semantic layer. It mean
Perfect. Perfect. The SQL Analytics endpoint, in that we created the views, but that views were not reflecting in the table section within the lakehouse. Correct? Now, whenever you create a lakehouse, the semantic model that gets created is the default table structured semantic model, meaning all the tables that are present in the table section of the lakehouse would only be created in that semantic model or synchronized into that semantic model. But imagine that I would have created views, some logical aspect, correct? And in case if I want that views to be part of that semantic model, it's there that I enable this property stating that add objects from the SQL Analytics endpoint to the default Power BI semantic model, meaning any new objects to the semantic model like view would automatically get synchronized into that semantic model. But imagine that if you all do not want this additional aspect and you want only the tables to be present in that semantic model, this property needs to be disabled. Now let me revert it to
What is the benefit? Like why, when we should turn it on or off?
what is a semantic model? It's basically your data storage layer for Power BI. Correct.
Right.
Now imagine that I already have 3 tables, correct, that are part of the semantic model, that is structured one, Titanic, structured duplicate. Now imagine that one way is I can have these 3 table join created within the Power BI itself. Correct? But imagine if there are some complex transformations like complex joins, functions, etc. As a SQL expert, what I can do is I can create a view and have that transformed layer in the backend itself, view itself in the form of simple SQL queries. And then I can enable that aspect so that that view gets synchronized into that semantic model. And I no longer need to do that complex transformation in the form of Power Query within the Power BI. I can simply take care of by creating a view in the SQL Analytics endpoint.
Okay. Okay.
Clear?
Got
So
it.
everything depends upon the core skill of the team that you are working with. Correct? Remember, Microsoft Fabric is an end-to-end tool. It provides multiple ways for you all to do the same aspect. But in case, imagine if your team strength is SQL, I leverage the SQL Analytics endpoint functionality, correct? So that most of my transformations can be done within the SQL itself. But in case if your team's core strength is DAX or Power Query and they are not familiar with SQL, they can leverage the semantic model transformation layer itself. So there are different ways how you can achieve the same functionality, but the crux remains what is your strength? Which one would you like to do? Which would make your life easier? Depending on that, one can leverage this functionality.
Okay.
Then there are tags that we all have covered across. Endorsement is something different that I'll cover in some later aspects. So any queries about the SQL Analytics endpoint up till now? And we would eventually see on how to access SQL Analytics endpoint in other sources like pipelines once we cover other aspects like notebooks, pipelines, data flow. This week and next week's session is majorly focused on the storage layer. Post that, we would work on the transformation or the data movement layer. At that time, we will understand how to access the SQL Analytics endpoint, etc., the shortcomings, etc. But for now, any queries on this aspect? Then
Can we create a views through and will it sync Fabric?
your voice is not clear to me. Can we create?
A view as we created using Fabric. Okay. So can we create views in the SSMS that will sync to the Fabric? No.
Correct. SSMS is just a layer, correct? It is connecting to your database. You are connecting to the database via SSMS or you are connecting the database via this portal, correct? The functionality would remain the same itself, correct? Let me create a view. Create view dbo.cross query. This I'm creating in the Lakehouse 2, correct? As, let me copy this. Select all from dpo.cross query. Remember, SSMS is just an interface for you to do anything with respect to your database that the database provides you. Any queries? Any other queries?
Will it source to the like in Fabric?
Will
Can we
it be
check? Sync to the
synchronized?
Fabric. Yeah.
Yes. Whatever changes you do It is not specific to that local. You are connected
Okay.
to that database itself. Correct.
Okay.
So it would synchronize. Can you see? Cross query.
Yes. Thank you.
Any other queries? Then there is something called as query activity. Now, what does this query activity represent? If you all saw, when I executed select all from information underscore schema, there were some query inside queries, correct? So basically these are inbuilt system tables, or one can also go and reference the query activity section, wherein it provides me the list of queries that were executed on the SQL Analytics endpoint. So here I can see that these were the queries that I had executed, like select all from lakehouse1.dbo.view1. This was the time at which I executed it. It took 4 seconds and this was a succeeded status. And then who had executed that query? And for every specific session, a unique session ID gets created. And the run source, I had executed it from the Microsoft SQL SSMS, correct? But imagine if I execute it from some other system like Notebook, Azure Data Factory, etc. It would provide me the run source as a different value. We will take a look once we actually work across data pipelines eventually. But the query activity section provides me with the queries that have been executed or the queries that are in progress based on the status aspect that I can see here. Then it would provide me the long running queries, meaning which query took the highest amount. If you see, others were hardly 0 to 1 second when I had executed. Since up till now, this was the longest query that I had executed, it is provided me in the section of long running queries. And then frequently running queries. This query I have executed multiple times. 1, run count is 1. If I execute multiple times, I'll be able to see that run count, how many times I've executed this. And whether there was any failed execution in that count, etc. So the query activity is the UI version of going and checking across what queries were executed, etc. But in case if you want to go and check from the SSMS or from the SQL query itself, you have some system inbuilt system views. So this would provide me which was the frequently executed queries. Now I can see that these were the executed queries. Now one aspect is this query here is showing me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But in the front end view, I am seeing in the query activity, I am seeing 4 now. But here it is showing 6 because check the lakehouse that I'm executing this. It's the lakehouse 2 here, and here is the lakehouse 1 that I'm querying upon. Correct. So let me execute this query in the lakehouse 2. It would show me the 4 queries that are visible in the front end view itself. So the front end version is similar to the back end version. It's just that we can execute from the back end via some system statements. And in case of the front end, I can go to the portal and identify the set of queries. So this is with respect to the query activity. Now I can download the SQL database project file. Now those who have worked on Visual Studio provides a database project file called DACPack, database project file, database control project file. So I can download it and it would give me a XML version of the code structure that is present for this database. And I can open this in Visual Studio and SQL Server Management Studio. And since my capacity is trial capacity, the Copilot is disabled. We'll take a look with respect to Copilot in the end sessions for all the components in together. So team, any queries with respect to the SQL Analytics endpoint up till now? Okay, I'll consider that as a no. So we will close today's session. We will discuss about semantic model, the default semantic model, and these options tomorrow. And tomorrow we would be covering on something called as time travel and optimization. Because time travel and optimization itself would take me 1 hour. And what in just layman terminology, what do we mean by time travel and optimization? If you see here in the tables, if I click on these 3 ellipses in the ellipses, I'll see there's an option called maintenance. In maintenance, there are options called optimize, V-order, and vacuum. Correct? So we would be covering these aspects, time travel, tomorrow. So team, any queries up till now?